The dull roar of suitcase wheels and loudspeaker announcements blurred into background noise as executives in tailored coats rushed past Gate 32, chasing flights and deadlines. At the center of it all stood Soren Vale, tech icon, genius inventor, billionaire founder of Lucident Systems. To most, he looked untouchable. Perfect posture, charcoal coat, clean lines, eyes fixed ahead like a man already living in the future. But beneath the designer armor was a heart running on empty. He shouldn't have come to the airport. Not like this. Not on no sleep. But when power calls, people like Soren answer. The final boarding call for Tokyo crackled overhead. He turned to his assistant to confirm the schedule. That's when it happened. A sound. Sharp. Bright. A child's laugh. Soren's head jerked up. It wasn't just any laugh. It was the kind of laugh that once lived in the quiet spaces of his memory. Light, familiar, and impossible. And then he saw them. A woman. 2 children. The boy was whistling softly through his teeth, just like Soren used to when he was nervous. The girl clutched her mother's hand and tilted her head the exact same way he did at board meetings. And the woman? The woman was Alira Rowe, the one who taught him how to feel, the one he hadn't seen in 6 years, the one he never truly let go. All 3 stared back, and that's when Soren's knees buckled. His body dropped. Everything faded. Right there, beside Gate 32, the billionaire who built a digital empire collapsed at the sight of the only thing he'd ever built without knowing it. If stories like this move you, take a second to like this video, subscribe, and share it with someone who believes in second chances. We've only just begun. What do you do when your past walks by? Holding your future's hand, not a metaphor, not a coincidence, real, breathing, right there. In a single glance, Soren Vale saw the life he could have had, and the life he never even knew he helped create. His chest tightened, the echo of security shouting, assistants panicking, the blur of strangers filming on phones. None of it mattered, because in that frozen second, before the world went dark, he realized the cost of everything he built, not in dollars, not in accolades, but in the quiet sacrifices no one else could see. Who were those children? Why hadn't he known about them? How did the woman he once loved learn to carry his absence like it was part of her? And more importantly, why now? Why here? Why this exact moment? These questions aren't about fame or scandal. They're about something deeper, something most of us wrestle with quietly. Regret. The kind that doesn't shout. The kind that settles behind your ribs and waits. This is the story of Soren Vale, a man who thought he had conquered everything, until life reminded him that brilliance doesn't cancel out accountability, and that real power isn't in being followed, it's in being forgiven. If you've ever let someone slip through your fingers, if you've ever asked yourself, what if I had shown up differently? Stay with us. This story may not change the past, but it might just shift the way you see what's possible next. Because sometimes a collapse isn't the end. It's the first time you stop running. Before the boardrooms and headlines, there was just Soren. Not Soren Vale, the name that trended alongside stock prices and keynote speeches. Just Soren, a boy with too many thoughts and not enough language to carry them. He grew up in a quiet Oregon town, the kind of place where people stayed in their lanes and didn't ask too many questions. Soren liked that. Routine made sense to him. Equations made sense. People? Not so much. By middle school, he'd stopped trying to fit in. While others played sports or chased weekend parties, he was dissecting code, obsessed with how things worked. There was always something humming beneath the surface, like the world was a machine, and he was the only one hearing the gears turn. His parents weren't cruel, just distant. His father sold insurance. His mother organized charity auctions. They loved their son in the way people love a painting they don't understand. From a distance, with polite admiration, unsure how to connect. By the time he was in college, Soren had already built 2 apps that quietly gained traction in underground developer circles. His professors respected him. His peers found him strange, but useful during group projects. He never cared. Validation wasn't the goal, but what he didn't know What all that logic couldn't prepare him for was how much he craved being seen. It happened on a Thursday. He had no plans to attend the open mic night. His roommate dragged him to it after a long day in the lab. Soren sat in the back of the cafe, arms crossed, scanning the room with faint irritation, until she stepped up to the mic. Elira. The first thing he noticed was her posture, upright still, like she wasn't trying to hide anything. She wore a burgundy sweater with sleeves pushed to her elbows, a simple necklace, and jeans with ink smudges near the knees. She cleared her throat once, then began reading. You can't say you love someone until you've let them see your shadow. Her voice didn't try to impress. It just was. Steady, warm, direct. The poem wasn't about heartbreak. It wasn't even about romance. It was about honesty, about how vulnerability was not an act of weakness, but proof of courage. Soren didn't blink the entire time. When she finished, she looked up. Their eyes met, just for a second. And something shifted. After the reading, he waited outside. Not because he had a plan, just because he couldn't walk away without knowing if she'd speak to him. She did. You don't look like a poetry guy, she said, sipping her tea. I'm not, he replied. But you don't write like someone who's trying to sound poetic. That made her smile. They stood in the cold until her cup was empty. He didn't try to impress her with his work. She didn't try to fix his awkward silences. They just existed, for once, without performance. From that night forward, Thursdays belonged to them. Not officially, not loudly. She'd show up with her spiral-bound notebook. He'd open his laptop. They barely spoke for the first hour, immersed in their own little worlds. But they shared space the way old friends might, without pressure. Elira called it parallel presence. Sometimes he'd read over her shoulder. She didn't mind. Sometimes she'd ask what he was building. He'd try to explain in metaphors, fumbling through her vocabulary instead of his. She helped him see people as more than variables. He helped her organize her scattered brilliance into something she could sell to publishers. They became each other's rhythm. Their connection wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. She had ink on her fingers, always, even when they went out for late-night walks or stopped by the Saturday market for fresh tea. Elira's hands bore smudges, evidence of her writing, of the way her mind never quite shut off. Soren noticed it the way someone might notice a fingerprint. Unique, small, defining. He, on the other hand, was always clean. Crisp, pressed, his laptop bag packed with military precision. Elira used to joke that his thoughts probably aligned themselves in rows before speaking. You'd alphabetize your emotions if you could, she once teased. I would, he said, but only to understand them better. Their contrast wasn't friction. It was gravity. She was all emotion, colors, and messy metaphors. He was data, logic, clarity. But when they sat across from each other at the cafe on 9th Street, her notebook tilted sideways, his screen glowing in soft blue, it worked. There were Thursday evenings when they barely exchanged 5 sentences, yet the air between them felt full. Not heavy, not awkward, just full, like neither of them needed to explain their presence. She gave him space without distance. He gave her silence without absence. It was a kind of affection that didn't beg for validation. It just grew, naturally, organically, without labels. One night, as winter set in, she handed him a folded page from her notebook. No title, just a poem. I never believed in stillness until I met you. Not the kind where nothing moves, but the kind where you stop running without realizing you've stopped. He didn't respond right away. She didn't need him to. He folded it and slid it into his coat pocket. That's where it stayed, for months, through long study nights, failed prototypes, the sting of rejection emails. That single sheet of paper became his grounding point. Elira never asked if he liked the poem. She just knew he kept it. Their closeness never demanded definition, but it deepened. Sometimes she'd fall asleep with her head on his shoulder while he coded. Other times, he'd wake up to her humming in the kitchen, brewing tea and tapping her pen against a half-written page. There was one evening when he tried to write her a poem. It was awkward, full of overcomplicated metaphors about quantum fields and neural networks. She didn't laugh. She read it twice, then kissed his temple and whispered, "You don't need to write like me. Just let me read you." He didn't know how to explain the way that sentence made him feel, so he didn't try. It wasn't perfect. Soren could disappear into his mind for hours, sometimes days. Forget to text back. He'd miss social cues. He once left her birthday dinner early because a server error popped up in his code deployment. But Alira never demanded apology, just presence, and when he gave it, he gave all of it. The foundation they built wasn't loud or dramatic. It was stitched together in ordinary moments. The way she tapped her foot twice when deep in thought. The way he always ordered an extra croissant, though he never admitted it was for her. The shared silence after a hard day. Him rubbing circles into her back, her tracing invisible words on his palm. They didn't talk about the future much, but they both believed they'd be in it, together, because love, for them, wasn't in declarations. It was in repetition, in showing up. Every Thursday, every time. The glass boardroom at Sycamore Capital overlooked downtown San Francisco. Polished, sterile, exactly the kind of place Soren used to mock when he was younger. Now, he was standing in it, wrinkled button-down, 2 days of stubble, and nerves masked behind numbers. Across from him sat 5 investors. Suits sharp, faces unreadable. He didn't offer pleasantries, just plugged in his laptop and let the demo run. Lucidin doesn't just analyze data, he said, clicking through slides. It anticipates behavior, corporate, governmental, individual. It doesn't ask what already happened. It predicts what's coming. No one blinked. Until the 5th slide. That's when the room leaned forward. By the end of the pitch, one of them said, "What you're building, if it works, it changes everything." It did work. They signed the check 3 days later. $15 million. Seed funding. Lucidin Systems was born. Soren didn't celebrate. He went home, collapsed on the couch, and stared at the ceiling. He should have called Alira. She would have brought a candle, some oversweet cupcakes, maybe even made a playlist. She liked marking moments. She said it helped her feel time passing. Instead, he opened his laptop and began mapping out security protocols for internal testing. That night, he forgot to call her. At first, Alira understood. Sort of. She'd been there before, when he was deep in a problem, unreachable even by oxygen. But slowly, the space between them stopped feeling like space. It felt like absence. They still saw each other. They still spent Thursdays together, though less often, but the connection started to feel like a habit instead of a choice. Their conversations shifted, from music and meaning, to vendors, patent filings, launch delays. Even the way he held her felt different, present in body, distant in mind. She wrote him a poem during that time. He never read it. It stayed folded on the counter for 3 days. By then, it felt too late. 2 months after the funding round, he moved into a new apartment. Bigger, sleeker, closer to the Lucidine office. The first thing he installed was a biometric entry system. The second, security cameras. He told himself it was precautionary. Too much was riding on this project. He needed to know who came and went, not just at the office, but at home. Even if he didn't say it aloud, the thought had started growing inside him. What if someone got to Alira? What if she didn't even know it? She found the cameras on a Sunday. They were barely visible, tucked in corners, blinking quietly. At first, she said nothing. She just stood there, holding her coffee, staring up at the lens near the bookshelf where she kept her first edition poetry collection. By the time Soren returned home that evening, she had already disconnected the camera near the bookshelf. She placed it neatly on the kitchen counter next to a note. "If you wanted to watch me, you could have just stayed present." He stared at it for a long time before moving. Later, when she returned from her walk, he didn't greet her. He just sat on the couch, elbows on knees, as if the silence between them could speak for him. But it couldn't. She stood near the doorway for a while. Then, "Are there more?" He didn't lie. 3. 1 in the hallway. 1 by the balcony. 1 near the entry. "You think I'm a threat?" "No. I think someone could use you to hurt me. That's different." Her expression didn't shift. That's worse. They didn't sleep in the same room that night, or the night after. And when she tried to speak with him, really speak, he answered with systems. Logic, forecasts, like love was a database he hadn't backed up correctly. One evening she sat across from him at the dinner table. Neither of them had eaten. He was scrolling through product dashboards. She was holding a torn piece of paper, a poem she had written 2 days prior. She didn't read it aloud. Instead, she asked a single question. Her voice didn't tremble. Do you trust me? He didn't answer immediately. He calculated, measured, and in that moment, when she needed a human response, he gave her a delay. That was the answer. She stood up, walked to the coat rack, and slipped on her jacket. He followed her with his eyes, but didn't move. Elira, he finally said, as she reached the door. She turned. Her face wasn't angry. It was tired. I can't be in a home where I feel watched instead of held. So I'm going to say this once. Choose clarity, or choose me. Soren's breath caught. He looked at her, this woman who had stood beside him when he had nothing. And still, he hesitated, not out of malice, but because fear had rewired his instincts, and by the time he opened his mouth to speak, she had already closed the door. No yelling, no slamming, just the sound of keys being dropped into a tray that would never hold hers again. If you've ever had to walk away from someone you loved for your own peace, leave a heart emoji in the comments, not to mourn what was lost, but to honor what you chose. The first sign came 2 weeks after she left, a forgotten mug of tea, now cold, a date circled on her wall calendar that she hadn't crossed off. Elira had been avoiding the thought, blaming exhaustion, stress, the sudden weight of starting over. But when the nausea returned, she knew. She sat on the bathroom floor, knees pulled to her chest, the test still shaking in her hand. 2 lines, clear, undeniable. She didn't cry, not right away. She just stared at the result, feeling everything and nothing at once. For a long moment, she thought of calling him. Her fingers hovered above his contact. But then she remembered his eyes, the distant ones that no longer looked at her, only through her. She set the phone down. That silence, heavy as it was, felt safer than another negotiation. She stayed with a friend in Seattle for the first few months. The apartment was small, just a converted attic above a bookstore, but it gave her something she hadn't felt in a while: privacy. No cameras, no explanations, just breathing space. During the day, she helped at the bookstore downstairs, stacking shelves, wrapping gifts, answering phone calls. In the evening, she wrote under the dim desk lamp by the window, whispering stories to the life growing inside her. When she finally told her friend about the pregnancy, the woman hugged her and said softly, "You don't owe him your peace." That became a quiet mantra, a thread she would repeat to herself whenever guilt tried to crawl back in. The months passed slowly, then, all at once, her body changed. So did her resolve. Every kick, every flutter beneath her ribs reminded her that life could bloom even after heartbreak. She started keeping a journal for the babies, letters written to people she hadn't met yet, but already loved with everything she had. "I don't know what you'll look like. I just know I'll never let fear decide for me again." When the twins arrived, a boy and a girl, she named them Kale and Lara, drawn from constellations she'd studied as a child. She liked the idea that their names carried light, even from far away. The first few months were chaos, sleepless nights, borrowed cribs, work from home when she could manage it. But Elira didn't complain. She'd already survived a harder kind of exhaustion, the emotional one. At least now, the fatigue meant something. When the twins turned 1, she packed what little they owned and moved to a small town in Montana. Population, barely enough to fill a diner on weekends. She found a job at the local library, cataloging old books and hosting children's reading hours. The work was simple but steady, and the quiet suited her. In the mornings, she'd walk to work pushing a stroller through the open streets, the air sharp and clean. Neighbors waved. People knew her by name, not by scandal or association. For the first time in years, Elira felt invisible in the best possible way. One night, long after the twins had fallen asleep, She made tea and turned on the TV for background noise. A news segment flashed on screen. Lucid Systems CEO Soren Vale named Innovator of the Year. She froze. The image showed him, in a dark suit, shaking hands at an award ceremony. Flashbulbs, applause, admiration. The anchor's voice described him as a visionary, a man changing how governments handle predictive technology. Illyra muted the television. She didn't hate him, but she didn't miss him either. He looked the same, sharp, composed, unreadable. Only she knew what it cost him to look that way. She turned the TV off and looked at the twins sleeping nearby. They each had a lock of his hair, those silver-streaked chestnut curls that glowed under the lamp. She smiled faintly. "You're not him," she whispered. "You're what's left of the good in him." Then she closed her notebook and wrote one more line before bed. Sometimes silence isn't weakness, it's a decision. By the time Cale and Lara were old enough to chase each other through the library aisles, the townspeople knew them all by name. Illyra had become Ms. Rowe, the story lady, known for the way she could hold a child's attention with nothing more than her voice. Every Wednesday afternoon, she'd gather a circle of kids, read aloud, and slip lessons between the lines: courage, honesty, kindness. Her own children would sit right beside the others, cross-legged, listening as if they didn't already know every story by heart. After work, they walked home together along a gravel road that stretched toward a horizon painted in soft gold. Cale carried a stick, pretending it was a sword. Lyra collected stones shaped like hearts. Illyra would watch them and feel that quiet ache, the one that lived somewhere between gratitude and grief. They were growing fast, and with every passing year, their resemblance to Soren deepened. Occasionally his name appeared online, magazine covers, interviews, conference highlights. Vale spearheads ethical AI initiative. Lucidine acquires quantum data labs. The words meant nothing to her anymore, but the photos did. He had that same precise expression, half calm, half haunted. Reporters called him visionary. She could see the exhaustion in his eyes. Once, an article mentioned that he never married, that he lived alone in a penthouse filled with screens. She read that line twice, then closed the page. Her heart didn't leap. It didn't break either. It simply accepted that some distances weren't measured in miles. Evenings in Montana followed a rhythm: homework, stories, laughter, then silence. When the twins finally drifted to sleep, Illyra would sit by the window with a notebook. Sometimes she wrote poetry again, less about heartbreak now, more about endurance. She wrote about mornings when the light felt kind, about the weight of a child's head on her shoulder, about the sound of peace when no one demanded it. Her words no longer tried to impress. They simply documented proof that she was still here. Money was tight. There were months when library pay barely stretched to groceries, but she managed. She sold a few poems online, edited essays for local students, even taught a creative writing class at the community center. The twins didn't know about Soren beyond what she chose to share. That man helped build the world you'll grow up in. They didn't need to know the rest. Not yet. She kept one photograph of him tucked inside a box of keepsakes. Not out of nostalgia, but truth. She wanted her children to understand where they came from, without bitterness shaping the memory. Sometimes she'd look at that photograph when doubt crept in. Not to mourn, but to remind herself that walking away had been an act of survival, not revenge. One winter night, a local reporter stopped by the library. He was covering a feature on small-town educators and asked if he could include her. She agreed, thinking little of it. Weeks later, the article appeared online. It was titled, "The Librarian Who Rebuilt Her Life Through Words." It gathered modest attention, just enough to make her students proud. But deep inside, she knew what it represented. Her story written on her own terms. She framed a printed copy and hung it near her desk, not as a trophy, but as a reminder that she had chosen peace over panic. One evening, after the children had gone to bed, she stepped outside. The Montana night was vast and quiet. She could see the constellations that had given her children their names. Cale pointed them out earlier that evening, connecting the dots with his finger. Lyra had giggled and said, "That one's me." Illyra smiled, watching their imaginary lines still faintly glowing in her mind. Everything she'd lost had led her here, to this open silence, to two small lives, filled with laughter, to a future that didn't depend on anyone else's permission. She whispered softly to the stars, "This is enough," and for the first time in years, she truly meant it. There are stories built on noise and stories built on stillness. Elira's was the latter. Silence had not been surrender. It had been strength, the kind that doesn't ask to be noticed, only lived. Every page she turned in that quiet library, every bedtime story she read aloud, every breath taken without fear proved one simple truth. Healing doesn't always look triumphant. Sometimes it's a woman shelving books in a small town, smiling at her children and knowing she made the right choice. Lax shimmered beneath its endless white lights, a blur of motion and noise. Rolling suitcases clicked against the tiled floor. Departure boards flickered names of cities like a chant. Tokyo, London, New York. Coffee steamed from paper cups. The scent of jet fuel mingled with cologne, anxiety, and the metallic tang of air conditioning that never quite slept. Gate 32 was a miniature universe of impatience. Assistants scrolled through emails, executives murmured into phones, children clutched stuffed toys as parents herded them toward boarding. Every second was a countdown to somewhere else. At the center of it all stood Soren Vale. Dark coat, polished shoes, calm posture that hid the tremor in his hands. His team surrounded him, 3 assistants, a head of security, a communications officer, but their voices blurred into static. His mind was elsewhere. Sleep had been rare these past few nights. Investors wanted results. Governments demanded updates. His body had learned to function on caffeine and willpower alone. The doctors had warned him about stress, but he'd dismissed it. Pressure is the tax of purpose, he once said in an interview. Now, even he didn't believe it. The gate attendant called the final boarding group. Soren adjusted his glasses and prepared to move. That's when it happened. A sound, a single high laugh cutting through the hum of travel noise. Light, musical, familiar enough to stop time. He froze. The sound hit him somewhere deeper than memory, something instinctive, cellular. He turned toward it, heart thudding unevenly. And there she was, Elira, her hair a little shorter now, streaked with sunlight, a soft linen dress, travel bag over her shoulder, and beside her, 2 children, a boy and a girl, maybe 6, maybe 7. Soren's eyes locked on the boy first, chestnut curls with a faint silver shimmer, like the streaks that ran through his own hair. Then the girl, those same almond-shaped eyes, steady and bright. Even the way she held herself, confident but curious, felt familiar. The boy was whistling softly, almost inaudibly, the way Soren used to when his thoughts grew too loud. The world narrowed to them. Every other sound dissolved. He couldn't move, couldn't breathe. Elira turned, sensing his stare. For a heartbeat, they simply looked at each other. No words, no gestures, just shock passing like static between 2 people who had built entire lives apart, yet still recognized the soul in front of them. Her smile faltered. His pulse surged, and in that instant, the weight of every choice he had made came rushing back. The meetings, the betrayals, the silence, the moment he let her walk away. Now she stood 10 feet away, holding his past in one hand and his future in the other. His body reacted before his mind could catch up. The floor tilted. The air thickened. He tried to inhale but couldn't. Voices merged into a distant echo. "Sir, are you all right? Call medical." He stumbled forward once. Then the world vanished beneath him. Soren Vale, the man headlines called Invincible, crumpled to the ground beside Gate 32. His assistants shouted his name. Security stepped in. Someone called for a medic. Cameras flashed as travelers lifted their phones, capturing a moment that would trend before the hour was out. But Elira didn't think. She didn't analyze. She dropped her bag and ran. Her instincts cut through the noise like a blade. The twins stood frozen as she pushed through the crowd, heart hammering so hard she could feel it in her throat. "Let me through," she called. "He knows me. Please." At first, the medics hesitated, protective of the fallen figure. But something in her tone, steady, desperate, real, made one of them step aside. She knelt beside him. Soren lay half-conscious, color drained, breaths shallow. His glasses had fallen, one lens cracked. The hand that once built empires now trembled like paper. Elira. His voice cracked, rough and small. She pressed a hand to his cheek. "I'm here," she whispered. "You're okay." His gaze flickered toward the children standing behind her. Their faces, his own features reflected twice, anchored him more than the oxygen mask or the voices around him. He tried to speak, but only fragments escaped. Those kids. Her eyes filled. She nodded once, tears catching in her lashes. "Yes, Soren," she said softly. "They're yours." He shut his eyes, and for the first time in years, a tear escaped. Not from fear. From recognition, from the impossible grace of being seen again. The medics worked quickly, voices low and urgent. Soren's pulse was weak but steady, his breathing shallow. They fitted an oxygen mask over his face and began checking vitals. Through it all, Elira stayed close, kneeling, motionless except for the tremor in her hands. One of the twins whimpered. She turned briefly. "Stay right there, my loves," she said, forcing calm into her voice. Her tone softened, but her eyes never left Soren. "Sir, we're taking him to the medical bay," a medic said. "He'll be all right," she replied, almost to herself. They loaded him onto a stretcher. Elira followed without asking permission. Something inside her refused to leave again. Not yet, not like before. Inside the small airport clinic, the noise of the terminal faded to a hum. Machines beeped. Monitors glowed. Elira sat on a chair beside his bed, fingers interlocked, fighting the swirl of memories that threatened to pull her apart. Soren stirred. He blinked against the sterile lights, confused, disoriented. Then he saw her. Elira. Her name fell from his mouth like a confession. She moved closer, her voice steady but soft. "You fainted." The doctor said it was stress. He gave a small, tired laugh that cracked midway. "I used to think I could outwork exhaustion," he murmured. "Seems I was wrong." She almost smiled, but the years between them weighed heavy. He glanced at her hand resting on the bed rail and hesitated before asking, "Those children, are they?" Her throat tightened. There was no easy way to say it. "Yes," she whispered. "They're yours." The words seemed to break something open inside him. Soren's eyes filled, slow and silent. For years he'd spoken to investors about prediction models, algorithms, and probability curves, but nothing could have prepared him for the statistical impossibility of this moment, seeing his reflection multiplied, alive, breathing, human. He reached for her hand, but stopped midway, uncertain if he was allowed. Elira didn't pull away. "They're beautiful," he said finally, voice unsteady. "They have your gentleness," she replied. He swallowed hard. "I didn't know." "I know you didn't." The silence stretched, heavy but not hostile, just full of things that couldn't fit into words. After a while, she said quietly, "They don't know who you are." "Not yet." He nodded, absorbing it without defense. "I wouldn't expect them to." Her gaze drifted toward the small window where the twins sat in the hallway with a nurse, coloring on a clipboard. Cale looked up occasionally, checking that his mother was still near. Lyra leaned her head against his shoulder, whispering something that made him giggle. Alira's chest ached at the sight, innocence untouched by the past. Soren followed her eyes. "Do they know anything about me?" "They know your name," she said. "And that you build things." He let out a breath that sounded almost like relief. "Maybe that's enough for now." He turned back to her. "I never stopped thinking about you." Her lips pressed together. "Thinking and understanding aren't the same thing, Soren." His face fell, not from anger, but recognition. He'd spent years mastering data, predicting trends, decoding human patterns, but he had never decoded her heart. "I was afraid," he admitted. "I know," she said. "Not of losing you, of losing control. That's what love asks for," she replied. "The courage to let go of control." He closed his eyes briefly, the weight of her words pressing against the years he had built in silence. Outside the door, the twins' laughter filtered faintly through the corridor. Soren looked toward the sound, tears slipping unchecked. I missed everything, he whispered. Alira touched his arm gently. You missed time, but not your chance. He met her gaze, searching for any trace of blame. There was none, only a quiet strength that spoke of healing earned, not gifted. Can I see them up close? He asked. She studied him for a long second before nodding. Yes, but slowly. They don't know what this means yet. She stepped into the hallway and knelt beside the twins, speaking softly. The nurse smiled and stepped back. Then, hand in hand, the children entered the room. They approached the bed cautiously, eyes wide. Soren tried to sit up, managing a small smile. Hi, he said. Alira finished for him. This is Soren, an old friend of Mommy's. Kale tilted his head, curious. You look like me, he said. Lyra added matter-of-factly, and like her when she's mad. Everyone laughed, the sound gentle, genuine. Soren's chest tightened with something he hadn't felt in years. Belonging. Lyra watched them, her eyes soft but guarded. This moment wasn't forgiveness yet. It was recognition. The first brick in a bridge that might, one day, hold their weight. As they prepared to leave the airport later that evening, Soren stood near the entrance watching them go. Elira, Kale, Lyra. 3 lives he never knew he needed, walking away through the glow of the terminal lights. For the first time in years, he didn't chase the next flight. He stayed still, just breathing. Should Elira give him another chance? Comment your honest answer below. We read every one. The doctors called it stress-induced syncope. Soren called it collapse. Of the body, of certainty, of ego. He stayed under observation for 3 days in Montana. Elira arranged it quietly, contacting a local clinic before flying home. When he was discharged, she didn't offer forgiveness, just directions to a nearby guest house where he could rest. He didn't protest. He simply nodded, grateful she hadn't closed the door completely. For the first time in years, he had nothing to manage except himself. No staff, no meetings, no screens. The silence was unnerving, but in that stillness, something unfamiliar began to take root. Humility. Each morning, he walked through the small town. Unfamiliar faces greeting him with casual warmth. No one asked for a photo. No one mentioned Lucidin. They knew him only as the man recovering from exhaustion. It was a relief he didn't know he needed. He started writing. Nothing technical, just reflections. Short sentences about choice, fear, and absence. His handwriting was clumsy at first, the pen shaking like his thoughts were relearning how to exist outside of a keyboard. A week later, Elira invited him for dinner. It wasn't a reconciliation. It was courtesy. The twins were cautious but curious. Kale asked about robots. Lyra wanted to know if he could draw. He couldn't, but he tried anyway, sketching lopsided circles that made them laugh. When they finished eating, Elira handed him a plate of leftovers. You'll need to eat something that isn't hospital food, she said. He smiled faintly. I'll try not to burn it. You probably will, she replied, and the air softened a little. He didn't leave Montana. At first, because he wasn't cleared to fly. Then, because he realized he didn't want to. He rented a small house 2 streets away from Elira's. Close enough to walk, far enough not to intrude. Days turned into a quiet pattern. Morning walks, grocery runs, reading about parenting instead of productivity. He visited the library sometimes, standing outside until closing, waiting for the twins to come out. Kale always waved first. Lyra took longer. She watched him carefully, as though testing the sincerity in his smile. He never pushed. He just kept showing up. Over the next few weeks, they found a rhythm. Some days he joined them for breakfast, helping tie shoelaces and pack lunches. Other days, he simply waited at the end of the school path, offering a wave, and a small joke that only half landed, but made them giggle anyway. He fixed the loose handle on Elira's porch door, painted the fence without being asked, brought her favorite tea from the town shop. It wasn't grand gestures, it was quiet labor, work that asked for no applause. One Saturday afternoon, Elira stopped by his house to drop off a children's book Lyra had forgotten. The smell of burnt pasta greeted her before he did. She stepped into the kitchen, suppressing a smile. "Lasagna?" "I tried," he said, scraping at the tray. It didn't survive the experiment. The twins appeared behind her, noses wrinkled. "Mommy, it smells like the toaster gave up." "It did," Soren replied solemnly. "It died bravely in service of dinner." The laughter that followed was light, unforced. For a moment, it felt almost normal. Elira watched as the children leaned against him, helping stir the salvageable parts. The image startled her, because it didn't feel foreign anymore. Later that evening, after the twins were asleep, she lingered by the doorway. "You don't have to keep trying so hard," she said softly. He looked up from the sink. "I'm not trying. I'm learning. To be a father? To be consistent." She nodded slowly. "Consistency is a good start." The next morning, Soren woke before dawn. He stood by the window, watching lights spill across the hills. For the first time, he wasn't thinking about algorithms or investors. He was thinking about breakfast, about whether Lyra preferred honey or jam on her toast, about whether Cale would want help with his science project. It wasn't ambition that got him out of bed. It was purpose, and it was enough. Weeks passed, and the children began to adjust to his presence in small, unexpected ways. Cale started saving questions for Soren. Why the sky changed color, why computers, thought, why grown-ups always said they were fine when they clearly weren't. Lyra still observed more than she spoke, but sometimes she'd hand him her crayons and command, "Draw with us." Those moments were tiny, but each felt monumental to him. On Monday mornings, he walked them to school with Elira. She carried the lunch boxes. He carried their chatter. They raced to the crossing light, and Cale always insisted he'd win. Until Soren let him. The teachers grew used to seeing him, the tall man who stood near the gate, waiting for a small wave before returning home. He began helping with homework in the evenings, his structured mind learning to bend around the twins' wild creativity. They taught him that answers weren't always what mattered. It was curiosity that made a person grow. One afternoon, Lyra burst into his house holding a crumpled paper. "I wrote something," she said. "It's like Mommy's poems." Soren knelt to read it. The letters leaned unevenly across the page. People can break and still build. Even houses need fixing, but they stay homes. He looked up, eyes damp. "That's beautiful, Lyra." She grinned. It's true. Her innocence disarmed him more than any award ever had. By autumn, he had stopped renting the guest house and bought a modest home nearby. Not a mansion, not glass and steel, just a place with creaky floors and a yard where the children could plant things. He filled it with second-hand furniture, books, and a piano that needed tuning. When Elira visited for the first time, she noticed the absence of screens. No tablets, no monitors, no trace of the surveillance habits that had once ruled his life. "You live differently now," she said. "I finally understood that constant observation isn't awareness," he replied. "It's fear disguised as control." She nodded, the weight of recognition passing between them. Slowly, the twins stopped calling him Mr. Soren. It happened one night while he was reading them a story before bed. Cale interrupted mid-sentence, whispering, "Dad, can you read that line again?" The word hung in the air, fragile, sacred. Soren froze. Lyra noticed his silence and added, "You don't have to cry. It's just what you are now." He laughed through the ache. "Then, I guess I'll have to practice being good at it." From that night forward, Dad wasn't a question. It was a fact. As months passed, the house filled with warmth that couldn't be engineered. There were messy dinners, homework scattered on tables, music from the out-of-tune piano. The same man who once measured worth in market value now measured it in bedtime hugs and shared laughter. Elira saw it all, quietly, from the sidelines. Her walls didn't fall easily, but she could see the change wasn't for show. It was built from daily proof, simple, honest, patient. One evening near winter, Soren invited them all over for dinner. He cooked again, this time successfully. Lasagna done right, garlic bread perfectly golden. The table was set with small candles, the good plates Elira had lent him weeks earlier. After dessert, when the twins ran off to build a blanket fort, Elira lingered in the kitchen. There was a folded paper in her hand. She placed it on the counter beside him. "I found this in one of my old notebooks," she said. He unfolded it slowly. The handwriting was hers, familiar, elegant. "To rebuild a bridge, you must start with the side you burned." He read it twice before speaking. "I didn't deserve that kind of mercy." "It isn't mercy," she said softly. "It's maturity. And you earned it by staying." He met her gaze, unsure what to say. There was no dramatic embrace, no sweeping gesture, just stillness, between two people who finally understood what connection required. She reached out and took his hand, not as a promise, not as a return, as a beginning. Later that night, after everyone had gone, Soren stood by the window watching the lights flicker across the snow. He realized healing wasn't a single moment of forgiveness. It was a rhythm of choosing presence again and again. He wasn't the man he used to be, and for once, he didn't wish to be. If you've ever rebuilt something from ashes, share a strong arm in the comments to inspire someone else. Stories like this aren't just about two people. They're about all of us. Everyone has a version of Soren and Alira somewhere inside them. The part that wants to build and the part that longs to feel. Sometimes we spend years chasing progress, mistaking control for clarity, productivity for peace. We call it ambition, but often it's fear dressed in accomplishment. Soren learned that too late for the years he lost, but just in time to reclaim the ones ahead. The hardest truth in love and life is learning the difference between clarity and control. Control tries to predict outcomes. It builds walls to stay safe. It watches, measures, protects. Clarity, though, it allows space. It listens. It trusts without proof. Soren built an empire on control and almost destroyed himself in the process. His world was filled with data, but empty of connection. Clarity came when he stopped chasing certainty and started showing up, moment by moment. When he stopped asking, "What can I prevent?" and started asking, "What can I nurture?" True strength isn't in managing everything. It's in admitting you can't. It's easy to say, "I'm sorry." It's harder to live differently. Alira didn't need Soren's apology. She needed evidence that he had changed. And he offered that, not in words, but in repetition. In consistency. In every school pickup, every burnt meal, every bedtime story, read with awkward tenderness. Apologies seek forgiveness. Accountability earns trust. The first looks backward, the second builds forward. Soren stopped trying to win her approval and started deserving their peace. That's when healing began. Kale and Lyra weren't just Soren's legacy by blood. They were proof of choice, his and Alira's. Every smile they gave him, every question they asked, reflected not only his features but his effort. They mirrored the man he was becoming, not the man he had been. Children inherit our patterns more than our possessions. They carry the echoes of how we love, how we listen, how we recover after we break. Soren once believed brilliance was measured by what he could build. Now, he understood it was measured by what he could rebuild. When Alira gave him that poem, "To rebuild a bridge, you must start with the side you burned," it wasn't a symbol of reunion. It was an instruction for life. We all burn bridges, through pride, fear, distance, or misunderstanding. The real question is whether we have the courage to return to the ashes and begin again, not demanding what was lost, but humbly shaping what remains. Sometimes rebuilding doesn't mean returning. It means restoring your integrity, your patience, your compassion. It means standing at the edge of your mistakes and building forward, not for validation, but for redemption. That's what Soren did, and that's what Alira allowed. Love isn't only about staying. Sometimes it's about walking away when staying means losing yourself. Sometimes it's about leaving the door open just wide enough for growth to walk back in later. Wiser, calmer, and real. Fear isolates. Control suffocates. But clarity frees. When you truly see someone, not as an extension of your fears, but as a mirror to your courage, love becomes possible again. And if you've ever lost someone, not through betrayal, but through time, through silence, through misalignment, you know what it feels like to look across the distance and wonder, could this have ended differently? Maybe it could have. Maybe it still can, if we learn from it. Soren's story isn't about a billionaire or an empire. It's about every person who has ever been blinded by their own drive. It's about the ones who finally pause long enough to realize that peace was never at the top of a mountain. It was waiting at the dinner table, in the laughter of a child, in the quiet acceptance of someone who once walked away. Forgiveness isn't about erasing the past. It's about redefining the future. And sometimes second chances don't arrive as grand gestures. They come quietly, like a knock at the door, a small smile, or a poem handed across a kitchen counter. That's where love lives, not in perfection, in persistence. We hope this story stayed with you. If it did, hit that like button, share it with someone you care about, and join the Mr. Ross Story Trail by subscribing. We've got more stories that just might change your perspective.